In the grand tradition of bureaucratic nightmares that span galaxies, the Galactic Research Consortium had managed to create the most mind-numbingly inefficient specimen collection program in recorded history. Picture, if you will, a universe where advanced civilizations capable of faster-than-light travel, matter manipulation, and telepathic communication somehow decided that the best way to preserve biological diversity was through a filing system that would make Earth's DMV weep with envy. The Universal Biological Archive, or UBA as it was acronym butchered, required every member species to contribute what the bureaucrats euphemistically called a representative sample of their kind. Translation: kidnap one of your own people, stick them in a zoo, and call it science. The Zephyrians had contributed a philosopher who spent his containment period writing increasingly depressing poetry about the meaninglessness of existence. The Aquatic Collective had somehow managed to submit their equivalent of a used car salesman who kept trying to convince researchers to upgrade their laboratory equipment. The hive mind of Proxima Centauri had submitted what could generously be described as their village idiot, though given their collective consciousness, this was somewhat redundant. But humans? Oh, humans were special. Not in the heartwarming, we're all unique snowflakes way, but in the these creatures are absolutely insufferable way that made even the most patient alien researchers consider career changes. For 37 Earth years, humans had been dodging specimen requests with the dedication of a tax evader and the creativity of a teenager explaining why they missed curfew. Their excuses were legendary throughout the consortium. Our representative is in another dimension. We don't actually exist. This is all a simulation. Our species is currently undergoing evolutionary transition, and we'll get back to you in a millennium. The personal favorite among consortium clerks was the 40-page legal document, arguing that humans were technically a hybrid species, and therefore exempt under subsection 84(7)b of the Interspecies Classification Act. The aliens, bless their multiple hearts, had tried everything. Diplomatic requests were met with diplomatic runarounds. Formal demands were answered with formal complaints about the forms being filled out in the wrong color ink. Threats of economic sanctions were countered with threats of releasing their reality television shows to the broader galaxy. Even the mighty consortium had its limits, and apparently, those limits involved being subjected to something called Love Island, in 17 different alien languages. Enter the research team that would make their careers on this mission, or so they thought. The crew of the scientific vessel Inevitable Discovery had volunteered for what their colleagues considered either the most prestigious assignment in the consortium or a suicide mission, depending on how much caffeine they'd consumed that morning. Captain Wiluxi of the Centaurian Empire stood approximately 9 feet tall, possessed 4 arms that were excellent for multitasking, and had the kind of confidence that came from never having met a problem that couldn't be solved with superior technology and a patronizing attitude. His second-in-command, Blentor, represented the silicon-based collective and had the distinction of being able to calculate interstellar navigation routes in his head, while simultaneously analyzing atmospheric compositions and maintaining what could charitably be called a personality. Their plan was, by galactic standards, foolproof. They had identified what their reconnaissance suggested was an isolated human specimen in a remote location on the planet's surface. No backup, no communication with other humans, and apparently engaged in some sort of primitive survival behavior that their behavior analysts insisted was typical of the species' more manageable members. The target appears to be constructing some form of shelter, using indigenous materials, Blentor reported, his crystalline form flickering with the satisfaction of a job well done. Preliminary scans indicate average human physiology, standard neural activity, and no technological augmentation. Perfect specimen material. Captain Wiluxi activated the ship's containment protocols with the smooth efficiency of someone who had done this exactly 17 times before with 17 different species. The tractor beam engaged, their target was acquired, and within moments they had successfully collected their first human specimen for the Universal Biological Archive. What they had actually collected was a xenobiologist, who had been conducting a 3-month solo research expedition, and had been wondering when the aliens were finally going to show up. But the research team didn't know that yet, and the next few hours were going to be educational for everyone involved. As their newly acquired human specimen was processed through decontamination and placed in what the consortium generously termed comfortable observation quarters, Captain Willaxy allowed himself a moment of professional satisfaction. Finally, after decades of bureaucratic runarounds and increasingly creative excuses, they had their human. The Universal Biological Archive would be complete, his career would be secured, and perhaps most importantly, he would never have to fill out another Form 2847X requesting permission to file a formal specimen acquisition notice. The human meanwhile was examining the walls of their new accommodation with what the monitoring systems registered as curiosity rather than panic. This, the research team noted with approval, was exactly the kind of docile behavior their models predicted from a properly isolated specimen. They were about to discover just how wrong their models could be. The first sign that something was amiss came exactly 14 minutes after containment, when their human specimen began what could only be described as a performance review of their spaceship. "Interesting energy distribution pattern you've got here," the human commented, running their fingers along the observation chamber's wall in a way that made the monitoring equipment chirp nervously. "Though I have to ask, why are you routing auxiliary power through your primary life support conduits? That seems like the kind of design choice that keeps engineers awake at night, assuming you sleep. Do you sleep? Your physiology suggests a crystalline matrix that might not require traditional rest cycles, but your companion over there," they gestured toward Captain Willaxy, "forearms suggests either evolutionary redundancy or a high-stress environment that required multitasking. Probably both." Captain Willaxy exchanged what humans would recognize as a concerned glance with Blentor, though given their vastly different facial structures, this was more of a telepathic equivalent of "is it just me or is our lab rat critiquing our interior design?" "The containment protocols appear to be functioning within normal parameters," Blentor reported, though his crystalline form flickered with something that might have been uncertainty. "The specimen is exhibiting curiosity behaviors, which our models suggest is typical for newly acquired subject." "Specimen," the human laughed, a sound that somehow managed to convey both amusement and mild insult. "Well, that's certainly direct. Most species at least pretend to use euphemisms." The Zephyrians called their contributors cultural ambassadors. The aquatic collective went with voluntary research participants, though I suspect the voluntary part was more aspirational than accurate. This gave the research team their first real pause. According to their intelligence reports, humans weren't supposed to know about other consortium member species, let alone their specimen collection practices. Their behavioral models clearly indicated that an isolated human should be experiencing fear, confusion, and possibly primitive attempts to establish dominance through displays of aggression. What their models hadn't accounted for was a human who immediately started offering technical advice. "You know, if you rerouted your quantum flux stabilizers through a parallel processing matrix instead of this series configuration, you could probably increase your power efficiency by about 30%. Might also solve that harmonic resonance issue that's making your deck plates vibrate at 8. That frequency is particularly annoying to most carbon-based hearing organs, just so you know." Captain Willaxy decided it was time to begin the standard specimen interview process, partly to gather data and mostly to regain some sense of control over the situation. He activated the communication interface and prepared to deliver the speech he had given exactly 17 times before. "Greetings, human specimen. You have been selected to represent your species in the Universal Biological Archive. Your cooperation in this research will contribute to the greater understanding of biological diversity throughout the galaxy." "Oh, good," the human replied cheerfully. "I was wondering when we'd get to the formal introductions, though I have to say, your approach could use some work. Leading with specimen doesn't exactly set a collaborative tone. Have you considered something like distinguished representative or maybe honored guest? I mean, I know it's the same thing, but presentation matters. Speaking of which, are you planning to ask me about my psychological state, cultural background and species-typical behaviors? Because I should probably mention that I'm not exactly what you'd call a typical human." This was where the interview was supposed to become routine. Standard questions about social structures, technological capabilities and biological requirements. What actually happened was that the human began psychoanalyzing the research team. "Captain, if I may," the human continued, settling into what appeared to be a teaching posture. Your body language suggests you're experiencing frustration coupled with professional anxiety. The way you're holding your secondary arms indicates stress, probably related to career advancement concerns. And you, Blentor, it is Blentor, isn't? Your crystalline matrix is showing micro-fractures along the tertiary vertices, which in silicon-based collective physiology typically indicates cognitive dissonance. Are you perhaps questioning some of your fundamental assumptions about this mission? Blentor's form flickered more rapidly. How do you know about silicon-based collective physiology? Oh, you'd be surprised what you can pick up with the right education, the human said with a smile that somehow managed to be both friendly and deeply unsettling. For instance, did you know that your species' communication protocols include 17 different ways to express bureaucratic frustration, but only 3 ways to admit you might be wrong? Fascinating cultural adaptation, really. Probably explains why you've maintained the same specimen collection methodology for 3 centuries, despite consistently suboptimal results. Captain Willaxy was beginning to understand why humans had been so difficult to collect. This wasn't going according to any of their protocols, and worse, the humans seemed to be genuinely enjoying themselves. You appear to possess knowledge that exceeds our preliminary assessments, he said, falling back on formal language in the hope that it might restore some professional dignity to the situation. Well, yes, the human agreed, though I have to say, your preliminary assessments were charmingly optimistic. Scanning for technological augmentations but not checking for advanced degrees. Classic mistake. It's like trying to identify a dangerous predator by looking at its teeth while ignoring the fact that it's operating heavy machinery. Advanced degrees. Blentor's voice carried a note that crystalline beings use to express what humans would recognize as dawning horror. Oh yeah, xenobiology with a specialization in interspecies cultural analysis. I've been studying consortium member species for about 15 years now. Fascinating work, really, especially the behavioral patterns that emerge during specimen collection scenarios. The research team was beginning to realize that their carefully planned mission had somehow transformed into a research project where they were no longer the researchers. Even worse, their equipment was starting to work better than it ever had before. The life support systems were running more efficiently, the containment fields were somehow more stable, and their navigation computer had stopped making that annoying clicking sound that had been driving everyone slowly insane for the past 6 months. All of this had happened while their specimen was simply talking to them. Captain Willaxy made a command decision that would haunt his dreams for years to come. Begin standard containment procedures, he ordered. We need to reassess our approach to this specimen. The human, meanwhile, was examining what appeared to be a maintenance panel with professional interest. Oh, this is fascinating. You're using a quantum entanglement lock for your containment system. That's wonderfully sophisticated, though I notice you've got a recursive feedback loop in your power coupling that's probably reducing efficiency by about 20%. Mind if I take a look at the schematic? It was at this moment that both researchers realized their specimen had somehow convinced them to consider letting it help with routine maintenance. This was either the most successful specimen collection in consortium history, or the beginning of a very embarrassing incident report. Neither possibility was particularly comforting. The escape happened during what the consortium's official incident report would later euphemistically describe as routine maintenance procedures, though anyone who actually read the details would recognize it as the moment 2 highly educated aliens got thoroughly bamboozled by their own specimen. It started innocuously enough. The human had been providing what could generously be called technical consultation for 3 hours straight, during which the ship's efficiency ratings had climbed to levels that made the engineering computers emit what could only be described as confused beeping. When their guest casually mentioned that the containment field's quantum entanglement matrix was causing harmonic interference with the navigation array, Captain Willaxy made the kind of decision that would eventually require therapy. Perhaps, he said with the careful tone of someone who was no longer entirely sure who was in charge, you could examine the maintenance access panel. For educational purposes, Lentor's crystalline form practically strobed with alarm. Captain, that would require temporarily disabling the containment field. Oh, don't worry about that, the human said cheerfully, already moving toward the panel with the confident stride of someone who had been waiting for exactly this opportunity. I'm not going anywhere. Where would I go? It's not like I could pilot an alien spacecraft or anything. This statement, delivered with a perfectly straight face, should have triggered every alarm in the research team's collective consciousness. Instead, they found themselves nodding along as their specimen began what appeared to be a routine diagnostic check on their most advanced security systems. What actually happened was considerably more sophisticated. The human's first adjustment improved the containment field stability by 40%. Their second modification eliminated the power drain that had been plaguing the system for months. Their third change did something that made the computer systems emit a sound like mechanical purring. Their fourth change disabled the locks on every door in the ship, while simultaneously activating the automated housekeeping protocols. "There we go," the human announced with satisfaction, stepping back from a control panel that now displayed readouts in 17 different alien languages, all of which indicated that everything was working perfectly. "Much better. Though I should mention that your security subroutines have some interesting vulnerabilities. Nothing dangerous, mind you, just inefficient." Captain Woloxy was about to ask what kind of inefficiencies when every door on the ship slid open with a synchronized whoosh that sounded suspiciously like the opening notes of Also Sprax. Throughout the vessel, cleaning drones emerged from their storage compartments and began what appeared to be a perfectly choreographed dance routine while simultaneously polishing every surface to an unprecedented shine. "How did..." Blentor began, then stopped as his sensors registered that the ship's power systems were now operating at 104th efficiency, which should have been physically impossible. "Oh, that's the beauty of quantum entanglement systems," the human explained, walking casually out of their former containment chamber as if they owned the place. "Once you understand the underlying mathematics, they're really quite intuitive. Though I have to say, your security protocols were written by someone who clearly never considered that a prisoner might actually improve their cage instead of breaking it." The research team watched in fascination as their specimen wandered freely through their ship, offering commentary on everything from their choice of lighting fixtures to their food storage methodology. More alarmingly, everything they touched seemed to work better afterward. "Your weapons systems are interesting," the human called from what had been a restricted access corridor. "Very sophisticated, though I couldn't help but notice they're calibrated for maximum lethality. That seems a bit excessive for a research vessel. Mind if I make a small adjustment?" Before either alien could respond, the ship's computer announced in a pleasant voice, "Weapons systems modified. All armaments now configured for non-lethal incapacitation. Have a nice day." "There," the human said, reappearing with the satisfied expression of someone who had just completed a home improvement project. "Much more appropriate for scientific endeavors. You really should consider your public image. You know, word gets around the galaxy about these things." Captain Woloxy was experiencing what human psychologists would recognize as cognitive overload. His ship was running better than it ever had. His weapons were now apparently set to stun, and his specimen was offering career advice. "This is highly irregular," he managed. "Oh, I quite agree," the human replied. "In fact, your entire approach to specimen collection violates about 12 different interspecies ethical protocols. Not that I'm judging. Mind you, bureaucracy has a way of making people do questionable things. Speaking of which, did you know your communication array has been broadcasting on an open frequency this entire time?" Blentor's form went completely rigid. "What frequency?" "Oh, nothing too embarrassing. Just your entire conversation log, from the past 4 hours, transmitted across 3 star systems on what appears to be the galaxy's most popular music streaming service. I believe Earth's greatest hits are now being enjoyed by approximately 47 million alien subscribers." The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of cleaning drones humming what sounded suspiciously like "Don't Stop Believing" in perfect harmony. "Now then," the human continued with the air of someone chairing a board meeting, "I believe we should discuss this specimen arrangement properly. I have a few suggestions that might benefit everyone involved." Captain Woloxy realized that somewhere in the past few hours, the fundamental nature of their mission had changed. They were no longer researchers collecting a specimen. They were specimens being studied by someone who had turned their own ship into a demonstration of superior capability. The worst part was that he was genuinely curious to hear what their former prisoner had to say. "Very well," he said, with the resignation of someone whose career was about to take a very unexpected turn. "What do you propose?" What followed was the kind of conversation that would have made diplomatic historians weep with envy. If diplomatic historians had any experience with negotiations where one party had already hijacked the other's spaceship through aggressive helpfulness, the humans settled into what had presumably been Captain Walaxi's command chair with the casual confidence of someone who had been invited to stay for dinner. First, let me properly introduce myself. Edwin Hartwell, xenobiologist, specializing in interspecies cultural analysis, currently on sabbatical from the Earth Colonial Research Institute. I've been studying consortium specimen collection practices for the better part of 2 decades. Studying Blentor's crystalline form flickered with what his species used to express deep suspicion mixed with professional curiosity. Oh, the usual academic methods: field observation, data collection, participant observation when possible. The human paused, examining what appeared to be a fascinating control panel. Though I have to say, your approach lacks a certain scientific rigor. No control groups, no peer review, and frankly your containment methodology is more suited to a zoo than a research facility. Captain Walaxi was beginning to understand that this conversation was going to redefine his understanding of several fundamental concepts, starting with who exactly was the researcher in this scenario. You said you've been studying our practices for 20 years. How is that possible without access to consortium facilities? Access. Dr. Hartwell laughed, a sound that somehow managed to convey both amusement and mild condescension. Captain, you've collected specimens from 47 different species over the past 3 decades. Did you really think none of them ever went home and filed reports? The silence that followed was the kind of profound quiet that accompanies the collapse of deeply held assumption. It was broken by what sounded suspiciously like the ship's computer humming, the girl from Ipanema in a minor key. You see, the human continued, warming to his subject with the enthusiasm of a professor who had finally found an attentive audience. The fascinating thing about your universal biological archive isn't the specimens you collect. It's what the collection process reveals about consortium member species, your methodologies, your assumptions, your technological blind spots. From an anthropological perspective, you're all walking dissertations on interspecies psychology. Blentor's form had gone completely still, which in silicon-based collective physiology indicated either deep concentration or existential crisis. Are you suggesting that we are the actual subjects of study? Suggesting? Oh no, I'm stating it quite definitive. Earth has been running its own universal biological archive for 37 years. We call it the Galactic Cultural Research Project. And frankly, our filing system is considerably more efficient than yours. Captain Walaxi felt something that humans would recognize as the ground shifting beneath his feet. Though given that he was currently in space, this was more metaphorical than literal. That's impossible. Humans lack the technological capability for interstellar research projects. Do we? Hartwell gestured around the bridge, where every system was now operating at peak efficiency, while playing what sounded like a carefully curated playlist of Earth's greatest musical hits. Captain, in the past 4 hours I've improved your ship's performance by 40%, modified your weapons to be ethically appropriate, fixed your communication array, and turned your cleaning systems into an impromptu entertainment experience, all while having a casual conversation. Does that really strike you as technologically primitive? The human stood and began pacing with the energy of someone delivering a lecture to particularly slow students. You see, the real genius of human research methodology isn't our technology, it's our approach. While you've been playing elaborate games of galactic catch and release, we've been conducting voluntary cultural exchanges. Every species that's ever collected a human specimen has unknowingly participated in our research program. Captain Walaxi's voice carried the tone of someone who was rapidly reassessing several career decisions. Oh yes. Did you really think it was coincidence that you always managed to capture exactly the humans you needed? The isolated ones with convenient skill sets and mysteriously comprehensive knowledge of alien cultures. Dr. Hartwell's smile was the kind that made experienced negotiators suddenly remember urgent appointments elsewhere. We've been volunteering for specimen duty for decades. It's actually quite competitive. I had to submit a research proposal and undergo 6 months of training just to qualify for this mission. Blentor's crystalline matrix began displaying patterns that roughly translated to the silicon-based collective equivalent of hyperventilation. Oh yes, formal designation, cultural analysis, of Centaurian command structures with secondary focus on silicon-based collective decision-making processes. Fascinating stuff, really. Your species' dynamics are exactly what our theoretical models predicted, though I have to say the reality is much more entertaining. The human produced what appeared to be a small recording device from their pocket, which beeped cheerfully as it was activated. Personal log, Day 87 of Cultural Exchange Mission Designation, CC-47. Subjects have successfully demonstrated predicted behavioral patterns, including hierarchical anxiety, technological overconfidence, and classic specimen collection methodology flaw. Recommend extended observation period for comprehensive data collection. Extended observation period? Captain Wiloxi asked with the careful tone of someone who suspected the answer would not improve his day. Well, naturally, I can't possibly complete a thorough analysis based on just one interaction. I'll need to observe your normal operational procedures, document your decision-making processes, and analyze your cultural integration patterns. Standard xenoanthropological methodology should take about 6 months. The human settled back into the command chair with the satisfied expression of someone who had just solved a particularly challenging puzzle. Don't worry, I won't interfere with your normal research activities. Well, not much anyway, though I will need to send regular progress reports back to Earth, and I'm afraid some of your colleagues might want to schedule interviews. Professional curiosity, you understand. Captain Wiloxi looked around his bridge, which was now humming along at unprecedented efficiency, while serving as an impromptu concert hall for an alien music festival he hadn't authorized. His weapons were set to stun, his prisoner had become his passenger, and his research mission had somehow transformed into a cultural exchange program he hadn't signed up for. This is highly irregular, he said finally, falling back on formal language because everything else seemed to have failed him. Oh, I quite agree, Dr. Hartwell replied cheerfully. But then again, so is kidnapping people for science projects. At least our approach involves informed consent and proper research ethics. Speaking of which, would you like to review the participant agreement forms? I brought copies in 17 different languages. As Captain Wiloxi contemplated the cosmic irony of becoming an unwilling research subject in his own study, the ship's computer began playing what sounded suspiciously like Sweet Caroline, while the cleaning drones performed what could generously be described as synchronized swimming through the corridor. Somewhere in the vast bureaucratic machinery of the Galactic Research Consortium, Form 2047X was about to become significantly more complicated.